Greetings, my name is JC,
And I'm Ian.
and this is the Gamer's Gaiden. Be sure to stay tuned because in this episode we're going to be talking about character development in video games. But before we begin, if you really want to help us out, be sure to like and subscribe and share the content with somebody else who you believe would enjoy the content as well. And before we start into the segment, let's get into what we've been playing this week. Ian, what have you been playing?
No surprise here. More Fire Emblem.
Okay, cool. Were you playing this kind of like on and off during the last week as well? Because you had played Ghost Giant the week before, so.
Yes, yeah, I have been kind of playing this on and off.
Cool.
I didn't really talk about it too much last week because Ghost Giant was something special.
For sure. And how far along are you in Fire Emblem now?
I'm inching closer to 70 hours.
Oh, wow, okay. Have you
Um,
beaten the one story arc, or you're only going to do one story arc? I
I'm
don't
only
remember.
going to finish one story arc.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, I think I've got about 2 of the in-game months left.
Oh, wow, okay. That
So
sounds like you're really close.
I'm pretty close. It's just kind of like getting over that last hump.
Right.
I did take probably about 2 hours while we were at Fan Expo last weekend.
Yep.
And I played a little bit of Mutant Year Zero,
Okay.
Road to Eden on the Switch, which it's a port from the PC version. Actually, they released it on console as well. And it's kind of neat. It's a like turn-based tactical, but open-ish
Okay.
world exploration. Like you have an open map, which you can kind of wander around. There are things you can interact with, and when you see enemies, you can like initiate combat. It's a little, and then it becomes turn-based.
Right.
But there isn't actually like a grid you're physically wandering around on. It's a little bit more loose, I guess.
It's more like distance and point to point, and then you're using up movement points, basically?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you have
Kind of like
like
Divinity Original Sin?
yes,
All right.
very much like that in the combat, except with weapons.
Right.
Yeah, I will say it's a little bit disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
The Switch version takes a drastic hit
Okay.
on the visual end,
Okay.
and a lot of the visuals get kind of muddy and murky, especially in the stealth mode. Everything kind of goes into this black and white,
Right.
and a lot of it gets washed out. Like, yeah,
That's too bad.
I know it's very unfortunate. Yeah, I think it's worth playing on console. I've
Okay.
heard amazing things about it as far as like gameplay goes. It's been out on the PC
Right.
for quite a while,
Okay.
and I think on anything that can handle it, it's probably worth it.
Okay.
But the Switch port,
It's just a bad port.
definite pass, yeah.
Okay.
But what have you been playing this week, JC?
So the Life is Strange Season 2 Episode 4 episode came out the weekend that Fan Expo was happening. So I played it whenever we got back. So that's the game that I'm going to be talking about today. So I played through that. It's normal length, 3 to 5 hours or something like that. Which is a good length. But I will say that I was actually a little bit disappointed by this episode.
Really?
Yeah. So generally, episode 4 or like the second last episode in the previous games have always really been a game where there was some sort of conclusion that happened in the episode, which allowed it to basically unfold to have like an even more dramatic conclusion. And I didn't feel that I kind of got that. I could see that they were kind of trying to go for that, and I did read the end game points where it was like this percentage of people did this or this percentage of people did that, and I could see it being potentially a little bit more dramatic. But I guess what it comes down to on my thoughts on this episode is in episode 3, the climax of that episode essentially it did some things in there that I thought were very concrete, and apparently they weren't.
Okay.
So the events that I thought unfolded, I'm being vague on purpose for people who haven't gotten to the episode yet.
Hashtag no spoilers, JC.
And yeah, so I felt that what they could have done with the episode based off of what I thought happened, and evidently what a lot of people on the internet thought as well, although there was some speculation onto whether or not the because it kind of like cuts the scene and then it just ends.
Oh,
And then so yeah, and so this episode uh didn't have uh a build up from what I thought happened, and it kind of just moved the story forward with the characters. And I felt it was kind of them pulling their punches a little bit, and that sort of bothered me because I don't feel like it's what the company generally does. Even Remember Me was a game that its end had like a good climactic finish and stuff like that. And I can only assume, since there's only one episode left, maybe they were doing that because they have explicit plans to end the game in a certain way, and they wouldn't have been able to do that with a certain result happening earlier. So I'm hoping that's the reason why, but I always felt like the second last episode was basically one of the better ones, and there's more of a cliffhanger. Whereas in this case, that was episode three,
okay.
and all the episodes generally have a really really great ending, but this one was a lot more backstory, a lot more story, and plot development. And that's in a couple of climax points of the story, and that was essentially it. And there was a lot more of the story development, and not even necessarily character development at this point. It was just really progression of the story. And I also felt that the episode was essentially more. It is a linear game. I'm not trying to hide from that, but it was more so linear just in the amount of dialogue that there was. And it was kind of just like panning camera to the next scene without much movement or interactability with some of the stuff. Because, like, sometimes there's a lot of plot points, like in the first game, for example, which we've talked about before whenever you played it, and you basically have some major points happening, and then there's like a puzzle in between or something like that, or there'll be
Yeah.
like objects you can interact with to get a little bit more of the plot and stuff like that. And they had some objects in one scene just before the climax of the episode where you just learned about what the characters were doing, but it was nothing really about the characters themselves, the main characters. But you do learn some good history about the characters because you meet somebody from their past, which was probably the best part of the episode. But other than that, yeah. So it was definitely really good, but I felt that it should have been a little bit better. And so, yeah, I guess if I were to quantify it, if it was like a 7 or 8, I felt like it should have been an 8 or a 9. They could have done a couple of more things with the plot, um, and the events that unfolded at the end of the last episode, and change things up a little bit, and how ramifications and moving forward and stuff like that, and then kind of go on from there. But then, like I said, it's probably because of how they're planning on ending it. So I completely reserve judgment on the game until I finish it. But so that's what I played. Yeah. So let's get on with the segment for today, character development in video games. And I thought that we would start off by going into our thoughts about character development. And I find that character development is a really interesting topic about video games because video games are now one of the largest mediums in the entertainment industry.
Yep.
It's making either the most or the second most amount of money. Like, it's making more money than film, and maybe it's not making more than like conventional sports, but it's up there for sure regardless. And it's really interesting because they can, due to the interactive ability with the user basically choosing the actions or walking through the actions, and potentially even having like a path A or a path B, where you're playing through a story, and you can have very different like endings to the game, like everybody dying or everybody living or somewhere in between and stuff like that, like multipath selections. It allows the studios to basically tell a lot different stories than what they could tell through a movie or a book or like a radio program, and just due to that interactivity, and it's much more of an immersive experience. And because of this, Basically, it allows people to become more attached to the characters. Whereas you read a book or a book series or a movie series, a television series, whatever the case might be, you grow attached to the characters, but you haven't necessarily like partially lived that experience because you're not like moving that character around or deciding not to talk to a certain person or deciding to do reaction A or reaction B, which is more evil or good or neutral or any of the
Or
other
even like
spectrums.
even going through some of the like heavy action sequences, it's like you
Yeah.
have been through stuff together.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Uncharted series is a good example of that
Yeah,
because a lot of it you go through with your friends, your partner, different characters of the game, and you grow apart from each other and you grow together again, and it allows you to do that type of storytelling. Whereas in a movie, you can't really do that unless it's like Bandersnatch or something like that, or what that will become eventually in the future.
but even still, like you don't become as attached to those characters. It's more so like you're choosing path. It's like reading a choose your own adventure.
Yeah, exactly.
You're picking path A or path B.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the interesting thing with video games, especially kind of from our like perspective,
Right.
because we're old,
We're not that old.
we've had the opportunity to really see storytelling and character development really grow
Yeah.
as part of the medium.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Because originally, 20, 30 years ago, it was fairly primitive, and
incredibly,
it has developed a lot from there.
like developers almost and game makers almost relied on you, the player,
Mm-hmm.
to project on the character.
Yeah, a lot of the older games that had good storytelling were due to the use of using like a blank slate tabula rasa of the character so you could fill in the blanks how you wanted, and it was really just the story progression rather than the characters developing. Like in Final Fantasy 1, it was the characters developing and you could imagine like where they come from and stuff like that, but you don't necessarily know, and the growth of that character is your leveling and stuff like that and the actions that you're doing throughout the story. But
Well, and you're naming those characters,
mhm.
and a lot of times they're going to be you and
Yeah.
your friends.
Yeah.
You're choosing their classes.
Mhm.
You're pushing them through this story, and it's you projecting um, yourself essentially onto that character. Whereas as we've kind of progressed, you have you have writers.
Yeah. You're hiring actual like novel and movie
Yeah.
writers and writers themselves.
And I mean, a lot of times you still do have that ability to project a little bit on the character through your own decision making
Mhm.
and choices, but
Yep.
um,
And novels are written and movies are directed in such a way that sometimes my interpretation of the end might be different than your interpretation of the end.
exactly.
But the actions that are taken are always the same.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas, my playthrough of, I don't know, The Witcher
Mm-hmm.
could be drastically different from JC's playthrough of The Witcher.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, they are because JC's never played through The Witcher.
Ouch. We'll get to it one of these days, folks. Yeah, and especially this allows us to relate to the characters a lot more too. And I feel that as the years have gone on, with the advent of development of technology, of the voice acting and motion capture of these characters to make them more real, and like you said, using the writers and stuff like that, and more companies are doing this, and it's not just the AAA companies that are doing it. It's the some of the indie companies that are doing some of that work, whether it just be voice acting or a little bit of both, because they rent out a studio or something like that, because it's much more common, a lot cheaper to do than it used to be, and stuff like that.
Well,
And
I mean, a few episodes back, even, we did a whole show on A Night in the Woods,
mm-hmm.
it was like a couple of people,
Yep.
and the entire game was just a character study.
Yeah, exactly.
Just yeah, yes, you make choices,
Mm-hmm.
and we did have different playthroughs,
Yep.
but I don't think they were drastically different. We just had different interactions, and we got to know different characters more.
Mm-hmm.
So
But on the other hand, that has a huge impact on the story of the game itself, because the way that like I played through with the characters in A Night in the Woods, because I interacted with one character more than you interacted with, and you interacted with the different characters a little bit differently and stuff like that, spent your day differently. It basically changed the how the story happened a
Yeah,
little bit different. The story
it's
was
true.
still the same, but
It
it's
was the how of the story.
exactly.
And again, it's the relatability, because I ended up hanging out with Greg a lot because I identified with Greg.
Hmm.
Greg reminded me of me. So, I wanted to see how he progressed, and his story arc.
Yeah.
It interested me greatly. So,
Yeah, and whereas I played through Beatrice's storyline because I really wanted to see how they handled the rekindling of the friendship, as I mentioned in an episode, because I thought that was really interesting, and I like how different writers and um, creators go through those types of stories, which I felt was really well done. Yeah. But yeah, there's no perfect way to develop a character, and everyone is going to have their own version of the character whenever they create one as a game designer, because there's literally hundreds of different ways, from various existing tropes to storylines that they can borrow from, or ideas and experiences that they have in their own personal background that they're um, uh, articulating through, like the two main writers of Night in the Woods. One of the reasons why it was kind of like slightly dystopian city, manufacturing city, is because they grew up in the Rust Belt, and that was a
yeah.
reflection of that, right? And that experience is going to be different than if somebody who grew up in LA writes a coming of age story or something like that, or a coming back to home story. They'd be a lot different.
Yeah,
Some of the
exactly.
points might be very similar, but they definitely would be a lot different. So yeah, it's really cool because you have an infinite amount of possibilities essentially, and with this medium, your playthrough can be different than our playthrough, and then any other combination of it,
Yeah,
which
because
is
I
really
mean,
cool.
like, not only do you have like an infinite amount of resources to pull from, you
Hmm.
have a almost infinite amount of different ways to tell that story.
Yeah.
Whereas with something like books and film, you are kind of shoehorned into having to sort of follow the same path.
Yeah, it's more of a to B conversation rather than like a to B to A conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah, continuing on, let's talk about some of the different types of character development. These are kind of like umbrella types of ways that characters have developed over the years in video games specifically. And the first one that I kind of wanted to go over is the simplest one, which was kind of like from our Final Fantasy example from before, or if you played any of the Ultima games, for example, in the past, is basically the simple power progression of a character. And this is literally typically what you see in most RPGs and MMOs. If you ever played a game like Super Mario RPG, for example, it's just your characters are leveling and progressing, and then there's a story that's happening around them. It's very simple, and a lot of the points of the progression of a character is more stat based, essentially in this arc.
And
Not that there isn't an actual story in a lot of these games that kind of blends into our next one, but one thing to realize is that a lot of the different types of arcs and ways to tell things are
faceted.
multifaceted.
I mean, the power progression is very noticeable, and it
Hmm.
is very stat based, but it's very visual too,
Yeah.
because you're going to see your character go from essentially wearing like a linen shirt and pants, in some cases like a ripped shirt and pants,
Yeah.
to this like the godly armor.
Hmm.
Um,
Like if you're playing World of Warcraft Classic right now,
yeah,
then this is something a game kind that has that exact feeling to it. There's literally next to no story in the beginning areas of the game with the core game, and it's just like, oh, here's a quest, and you're watching your character level up and get new gear and stuff like that, and
slightly better boots,
yeah.
and then you're going to get slightly better boots, and then eventually you get to the end of your progression, and you're going to have like glowing huge boots.
And then you're going to craft boots that are better, and then you're going to get a drop that was much cheaper and faster to get than what you just spent all your money crafting on. But yeah, I'm not projecting from my EverQuest 2 days. But anyway,
But that drop had a 2% rate, so
yeah, yay.
anyways.
You're still ecstatic and happy about it anyway. But let's go on into our second kind of like a large type of character development, and that's really the story plot arc. And this is kind of just sort of where there's a overall arcing story that the characters in a game will go through, but the characters themselves don't necessarily have that much plot to them themselves. So there are a lot of games where, like some strategy games, like the XCOM game, for example. XCOM is a good example of this because the plot of the game is really just like, hey, aliens are attacking. You have no distinctive crew. Like some of them have came from like a side quest or something like that, but like your core people that you're recruiting are just people. Like you give them their own story.
Yeah.
Their story are stats, which is from the previous section of the power progression stuff. But like the actual game itself is really just a story plot arc.
Well, it's also a lot of the first person shooters would follow this.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
really, like, there's no or very little power progression in a shooter.
Yeah, unless it has some RPG elements, but most of them.
No, a lot of them
yeah.
don't. Like, I as soon as you mentioned this one, I instantly thought of Modern Warfare 2, where
Right.
you're just there and stuff is happening.
Yeah. Medal of
And
Honor is another good example of this,
yeah,
or like the Doom guy in Doom. It's
good old John Doom guy.
yeah, and you know it's exactly what it is. It's just a story with some person going through that story, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And the last one is the character or personal growth type of character development, and this is where the character themselves really have their own unique attributes and usually a backstory or alignment that allows them to make certain decisions, like whether or not they're sort of a little bit like chaotic a little bit. There's generally I would find in these types of stories there'd probably be, for the designers at least, some sort of like template or back like a sheet that they would have. I'm forgetting what those are called right now, but to actually like keep everything that the character is doing to canon, right? And you find that a lot in a lot of games where sometimes they're just necessarily only based on the characters and not necessarily as based on the story themselves.
Night in the Woods would be another good example of this,
Mm-hmm.
or the
Oxenfree is another one.
Oxenfree, Life is Strange,
Mm-hmm.
Anything where you're, or Gone Home.
Yep. Yeah, Gone Home is the perfect example of just the character growth, because there's really the story itself is actually just the
Being told to
progression.
you.
Yeah, the progression of the person themselves, right? Of their the inner monologue that happens in the game.
I mean, the gameplay is the ultimate thing in just rooting through somebody's house. But
Which is your own.
really, the story is just like told to you.
Mm-hmm.
As you touch certain items, you get that like,
Yeah.
hey, it's yeah. That's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and again, the reason why we're kind of mentioning these three core kind of different types of character development, there are many more, but these are three core ones that we felt that we should go over, is that they're multifaceted, as you said, and all of these always overlap. You generally don't always have just one explicit type of character development in a game, like unless it's wizardry, where literally it's just a power progression character arc. But then there's really still a story in it. So like at its base root, there's still two of the three of them in there, because the manual tells you you want to kill Wordnard. And
I mean, it like Diablo is a simple power progression, but it does have a story.
Yeah, as simple as it is, it's still there, and it gives you the connection points in between it. But what the player cares about is one of those. And I find a lot of the time, though, they usually pick either one core one to really focus on, or they usually pick like two or three and then focus on them like a little bit less than they would if they would have only focused on the one.
Yeah.
Unless it's a AAA game that was in development for 7 years, but then sometimes it doesn't necessarily work all the time. Anyway, continuing on. So, let's go on into some character tropes. And again, there are hundreds of different character tropes. There's a website called tvtropes.com, and that has a ton of different information about books, movies, television shows, video games, and character tropes and the different types. But here are some of the main ones that we felt that we should go into because we found them interesting. One of the biggest ones that I like because we grew up in the 90s and
this was one of the biggest ones, period.
Yeah, especially with cartoons, it's the Chosen One syndrome. And if you don't know what that is, basically one character who amounts to nothing is the Chosen One and is the only person who can really save anything, regardless of other characters being around them or how much they help them. The mindset of the character or the main plots of the character or of the mediums is that it's this one person.
Yeah,
right? It's just that one person
specifically. It's Jim in accounting. It's not the entire building. It's specifically Jim.
Yeah. And generally these types of people are selfless heroes, such as Commander Shepard or Link.
I mean, Commander Shepard depends on how you play him.
Starts as a selfless hero, though.
That's true.
Especially whenever you select one of the multiple backgrounds. You add more flavor into it, but then what happens is like they're really a chosen one. They're part of the Chosen One syndrome, but then the few things that you select in the game are like in the Venn diagram of the personal background of that character to give them more layers and more flavor.
Yeah.
And BioWare games do this type of stuff really great because they have a lot of focus on most of the time story and character development. So yeah.
See, I thought Persona was a little bit better example of this because you've got the guy who just shows up
out of nowhere,
doesn't talk, can control every persona, whereas anyone else in the world can have one.
Right.
You can have all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're just like a living god because why not?
Yeah, anime seems to heavily weigh on the Chosen One syndrome for many of its story arcs.
Yeah, they really lean into this a lot.
Everything from Dragon Ball Z to Sailor Moon to My Hero Academia, and everything in between. It's just, it's just what it is. But it's fun. A lot of people like it, and it is entertaining.
So another one of my personal favorites is the Action Survivor.
Right.
So this is your kind of like Indiana Jones or John McClane.
Right.
Someone who, they were movie examples. I apologize.
But they're still great characters.
Yeah, they're great characters, and they're great examples of this. Stuff happens, and they are there. And they always seem to get through it.
Yeah, no matter what.
Yeah, they might not.
I don't know how Nathan Drake makes it through a bunch of the things that happens to him.
Nathan
but
Drake
does.
is an amazing example of an action survivor.
Yeah.
In that he gets through these crazy things,
like the train thing.
And really, what's Nathan Drake? He's a treasure hunter.
He's an archaeologist.
Yeah.
I guess. This happens to Lara Croft as well, because especially in the new Square Enix games, and in the original games too by Idios, but she basically has circumstances happen to her from Trinity, and her father's past kind of blend together to affect her, and she survives them, and then gets through them, and, it develops her character.
Especially through the first game, she is 100% an action survivor. I mean, the first half of that game feels like a beating up a character simulator.
A little bit.
She's just constantly getting hammered with things. She starts off with a little bit ratty-ish clothes because she goes through a shipwreck.
Right.
But then from that point on, it's like, oh, okay, arm's broken. It's just you're piling bandages on this character through the entire game.
And it's like, man, if that happened to me, I would have died 10 scenes ago, and this is the second scene.
I wouldn't even die. I would have packed it in at the when I washed up
at the
on
hotel.
The beach. I'd have been all right, I made it through a shipwreck.
Cool, I'm out.
I'm done. Set up a tent and a campfire.
Well, no, because then the people from the island will just come after you. And
I guess that's true.
So you're screwed no matter what.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah,
but
we were the NPCs of that story that just die in the background. But yeah, the Action Survivor is one of the heavily used one, especially since if it's an action-oriented game, it has the word action in it.
Your adventure games, typically your protagonist is going to be an action survivor.
Yeah. The Guide is another one of them, and this one's kind of a weird one. And the reason why is because this normally happens to NPC type characters, and sometimes they're really freaking annoying. And sometimes they're actually quite useful, or they're characters that have likable qualities and stuff like that. But this is basically where the character's sole purpose is essentially to move you to the next location. They generally have no backstory, or if they do, it's generally very dull and doesn't matter, and it doesn't really get filled out until like 4 games later.
But in some cases, it is really interesting.
It is, yeah.
Like Sully.
Yeah, this
from
is
Uncharted. I know we keep
hammering
on Uncharted, but
I mean,
it does
the
have
writing
some
is
great character development. But he's a great example of a guide because he kind of keeps you moving through, and you get his backstory throughout the game,
and you get a lot more of it in the 4th game.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the annoying NPC that has no background and story that is the guide would be Navi or Tingle, because you have to listen to know where to go.
But I think a great example of this, with the just moving you from point A to point B, with very little character development at all, would be the Dinklebot from Destiny.
Oh, the ghost.
The ghost, yeah.
Right.
The Peter Dinklage voiced one. Because it was so dry and pointless. And he just, delivered his lines.
I have a feeling that they told him to basically say it in monotone.
They're like,
and then
be
it's
as
like
interesting
robot.
as possible.
And then he was like, "Are you sure?" And then they're like, "Yeah." And then they realized asking him to do that was a terrible mistake, because they did end up editing it out.
Yeah, they brought Nolan North in and got him to revoice it. But I think that was a great example of a guide.
Yeah.
Because really, he has no purpose other than to move you from point A to point B. He's not he's a non-character.
I guess Cortana would be one of these characters too, would she not?
She would, but Cortana's more of a Sully.
Okay.
Because she really develops over the course of the series.
But past the 1st game, right?
Yes. Yeah. First game is just a voice in your head.
Yeah.
Moving you from point A to point B.
There's
she did better than Dinklebot though.
Yeah. There's the AI, the ED in Mass Effect and
whoa. I mean,
as well.
Edie gets promoted to playable.
That's true.
That's one of my favorite tropes. Promoted to playable.
Where's a character that everybody really likes, and due to
it was an NPC that suddenly they come to action in their next game.
Yep.
Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 games, whatever.
But at least we get it. But moving on out of the serious list is the Antihero, and this one is really prevalent in DC Comics, but it's go ahead.
And Marvel. I mean, you got the Punisher.
Yeah, that's their one.
Yeah, that's their one. I mean, most of DC's catalog is anti-heroes. But this one's kind of neat because they're usually like a vigilante.
Yeah.
Or
they're evil characters who basically end up being a hero, or at least at a bare minimum an evil character who just takes out other evil characters. And Raziel from Legacy of Kain is a really good example of this in the video game world, because he's basically a fallen character because he surpassed Kain, and then he's killed. The Elder God revives him in order to be able to take vengeance against Kain. And that's basically this is a really high level non-justice to the game.
Even Kain himself is an anti-hero because he has his own really interesting arc through the first game.
If you've played
if you have played Blood Omen Legacy of Kain
or Blood Omen 2.
Yeah, it
but
is
he's more of a bad guy. But he's partially this.
He's way worse than Raziel, but
yeah.
I mean, also any character from Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Any character from Grand Theft Auto. They're all anti-heroes.
Because they're trying to do good in their own vigilante way, where they live in like the crime syndicate, and that's basically what it is. It's kind of like bad guys fighting bad guys.
Yeah, and I mean, everyone has their own version of a redemption arc, essentially.
Yeah. Well, many people do, not everybody.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of your shtick in Grand Theft Auto things. You're always going through that sort of redemption.
Yeah, the newer ones for sure.
From villain to slightly less villain.
At least you took out the people who were worse than you.
You killed the people that were worse, making you the worst now.
Yeah, promotion.
Yeah. But moving on, we also have the hardened hero / veteran.
Yeah.
This is the one that tends to pop up mostly in first-person shooters.
Yeah, or action-adventure games.
This one's kind of that, war or conflict is hard.
Yeah.
And these are guys who have been through stuff, whether it's physical or emotional, and kind of come out the other end as in a lot of situations, killing machine, like Doom Guy.
Yep.
He's a great example of this. He's your hardened hero.
Yeah.
Even Duke Nukem. Again, I'm throwing out first-person shooters.
Yeah, but the characters from Gears would be a good example of this too, right? Because they develop over the games.
They do develop a lot, and yeah, they are that like.
Yeah.
For the most part,
it's a trope.
I have a real hard time listening to Marcus Phoenix, especially after watching so much Adventure Time, because it's he's voiced by the same person who does Jake the Dog. So all I can hear now is Jake the Dog when I hear Marcus talk, and I hope I ruin that for somebody else, because
I didn't know that.
Totally done for me. He's Bender from Futurama as well.
I didn't know that was all the same voice actor, because I didn't recognize the Gears voice actor. I didn't play it long enough, I guess.
Yeah, John DiMaggio has one voice.
Yeah, I know he has only one voice, but I'm just saying I didn't realize that was his voice. I mustn't have played it.
And every time I hear him yelling, I'm just like, Finn's gonna show up sometime.
Yeah,
I know it.
But a good example of the combination of the hardened hero, which is both physical and emotional, is Lara Croft again, especially in the Square Enix remakes of the game, especially going in from the first, second to the third game, because, she's really, like we mentioned, with the action survivor aspect of like all three of the games, but mainly the first like 2/3 of the first game. But the second game, you start to learn a little bit more of her backstory and the reasons why she actually wants to do certain things, and her father missing, and like her family kind of being a little bit broken apart and stuff like that. And yeah, I find she's a really great character. She's written really well. I'm in a way kind of really glad that this was picked up by the current developers and everything.
They did a really amazing job of like revamping the character from in the original games, she's very much the hardened hero.
Yeah, for sure, because she's a very strong character.
Like, she is just a badass from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, that's, you're running in guns a-blazing, killing dinosaurs or like Yetis. Whereas, like, you have an actual progression in the new games from that, like, action survivor to a veteran, really.
Yeah. And let's...
we'll keep moving on. We could go on about that all day.
But Cold and Alone is this next trope, and this is generally where the character is shy or a loner, and if you play some Final Fantasy games, you probably know who we're talking about.
Don't do it.
Cloud or Squall.
You keep your shade on that side of the couch, my friend.
But it's so true.
Squall is a hardened hero.
Okay, sure. Yep. He's also the chosen one and an anti-hero as well. Why not?
yeah. He's all of the good things.
But yeah, so this is basically, these aspects are kind of the only reason why they usually talk or interact with other characters or other points in the story are really to move the plot forward. Like, generally in a lot of these cases, you would almost feel that like nothing would really happen if there weren't people around them. And it's just it's a very stereotypical trope. It was used a lot in the early 2000s in video games with the Square games, especially because Cloud is another example of this. No matter how much people, and there's nothing wrong with this trope, no matter how much people love these characters, but a lot of the time, if there's a silent protagonist where a game has a lot of plot and backstory, the main character is usually cold and alone, so to speak. And basically they generally give a response, and oh, woe is me. It's okay, Squall. I get it.
I mean, you're right, especially again, not to brag too much, but playing a whole bunch of that Final Fantasy VII remake demo.
Right.
Yeah, when you get to any of the dialogue, Cloud's just kind of like, I'm just here for
I'm
money.
here a job.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to get paid.
And they portrayed that character so well, and I like these types of characters. They're interesting because it's how are they going to develop. If they don't develop, then it's not necessarily that great. But like Cloud goes through the whole amnesia scene where he kind of like loses his mind, and Tifa has to work his way through it, and then he realizes that like maybe he should have more open relationship with the people. And even Cloud does that whenever you have the back scene where you see the scene with the orphanage before you go fight Sorceress Ultimisia and stuff like that. Yeah, Squall, sorry.
That's okay. I mean, they're kind of the same character.
They're very similar. Yeah. It's the characters around them that really develop those characters.
It
and
is.
that's part of the trope. And the last one that we wanted to go through is the amnesic hero, or a hero with an unknown past. And this is basically my points on it, because writing a background is really freaking hard, so why bother?
It was like my favorite note in all of the notes. Is I mean, who needs it?
Yeah.
Just, you're a person. Figure it out.
Yeah, because like sometimes these characters end up actually having actual backstory, just like the Cold and Alone characters.
Yeah.
And I find that if this happens, then generally, like if one happens, the other one is somewhere in there a little bit. And
It's true.
It's a gradient scale for all of these things, obviously, right? Because you could be all of these things with your character because it's the best written character ever, but then it's like
so many layers.
10% of each or whatever. But yeah, and like I was saying, whenever they do end up having a backstory, generally that usually comes out if it's a series and it's like the second or third game, or it's a really long RPG that's like 80 plus hours and it actually has time to develop this into an actual plot point in the game.
Well, this kind of was
point.
a like key plot point in a lot of the like late 90s early 2000s RPGs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where you're like you're that guy who shows up.
Yeah, it was a good way to not have to, because especially at that time, games were really trying to add in more plot and be more cinematic and stuff like that. And instead of going full cinematic, which I'll talk about in a second with this Amnesia unknown hero past, they essentially didn't have the time or want to spend the effort in order to do that. So that's what they would do. It would just be like, oh, like I don't necessarily know, or I don't explain who I am, and it's just kind of like a character, and it's made a point in the actual plot where you don't know anything about the past.
Yeah, you just showed up one day.
Yeah, and you may not find out. But as I was saying, the cinematic style, whenever used in a video game, this actually can work really well with this style of character trope. And great examples of this are, well, you've played all these games.
Well,
so why don't
the
you
first BioShock, I think, was a great example, because you're just a dude in a boat. You get really no explanation.
Yeah.
Just that you're going to this place. You have a letter and you're going to this place. You don't really know anything about your character.
Right.
And then you actually learn more about the character as time goes on. And it becomes really interesting. Another great one, again, 80-hour RPG.
Yep.
But Fallout New Vegas, where I think you get dug up out of the desert.
Right.
I think it's been a long time since I've played New Vegas, but you kind of just show up.
Yeah.
Like you're very much just a blank slate to be molded, and to make your own poor decisions.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's I'm sure they're. Oh, and Snatcher.
Right.
Jeez, why did I forget about Snatcher? Yeah, you have amnesia. Yeah, Snatcher's like one of my favorite games. Yeah, that is a key plot point of the game. Is you have amnesia.
Right.
Like we found you in this place so many years ago, and you actually learn about your character as the game goes on. Like,
yeah,
the climax of the game, no one is going to play this. The climax of the game is you figuring out your past.
Right.
And it's like, it's interesting. Like, it was really well done. I loved that game. But that's your kickoff point is, this is your name. You have amnesia.
Yeah.
You were found like X amount of weeks ago or years ago in Russia in some lab. And you were moved to Japan because why not?
Because Japan.
Because Japan.
Yep.
Because it was made in Japan. It's an easy one to lean on because you don't have to worry about a lot of explanation up front.
Yeah, and it allows you to concentrate on other aspects of the story itself, rather than like the need to or the wants to have a fully fleshed out backstory.
Yeah, you don't have to take that like 15, 20-minute intro to be like, this is who this person is.
Yeah.
This is why it matters.
Yep. So we figured we would finish up by going into some character examples of really great character development that we really enjoyed and go over some of them. And again, this is just a generic overview of these characters. We're not going to overly go into depth due to time. And
yeah, like each of these could be their own episode.
Yeah, they really could be their own episode. But here's our list of some interesting characters that have really great character development. I'll start. One of my favorite characters from the Dragon Age series is Meryl. And she kind of is a all-loving hero, which is another character trope. We're going to be also talking about some tropes that these characters have, which we didn't talk about earlier. Like I said, there's so many of them. But she's extremely kind to everyone she basically meets, the hero, everybody else, even though everybody has varied pasts and stuff like that. And after knowing more of her backstory, probably in a lot of circumstances, probably most people wouldn't necessarily be that open with people. But this character is one of those like very personable, like friendly type characters. But her main character arc is really just a tragic character and an elusive past, and that because she is a blood mage, which in the world of Dragon Age, in case you're not aware, is a taboo type of magic, which is essentially outlawed, and the Chantry would basically kill you if they found out that you're a blood mage, and she's in the main party, and depending on what you do in the first game, the Chantry might have more of an impact or not in your mind, depending on how you view things. Or you could have started here and depending on what you do. And some characters completely disagree with her using the blood magic and stuff like that. But I highly suggest you playing through her story arc if you've never actually played through it. It's very well written. I think it's probably, like I said, it's my favorite character from the series, and it's definitely one of the top 3 written characters I think in the trilogy so far. And yeah, so you're basically using her forbidden arts, and she actually wishes to restore a magic mirror called an Illuvian mirror, which is vested in mystery, and her past is really vested in mystery because she doesn't really fully explain why she uses blood magic initially, or what happened to her in her group of elves and stuff like that, because there's 2 types of elves, and one group of elf basically are wanderers, and another group of elf are essentially they live in the slums and stuff like that.
City elves and forest elves.
Yeah. And so
I know that much about Dragon Age.
So yeah, it's really really interesting story, character development of the character, and it doesn't necessarily have to have a good conclusion to it, or and it can have a good conclusion to it holistically, which I felt was really fitting, because you can still go through the character arc. You can do this a lot with many BioWare games, but you can go through the character arc, and then once you get to a certain point and you realize like what her motives and her background, which are causing those motives, are, you basically have that point. Do you want to help? Do you not want to help? And then you have the ramifications of helping or not helping on both the party dynamic and the personal character to character dynamic, depending on whether you're being good friends, or you chastise her out, or you're romantically involved with the character. It has all those aspects to it, which is the reason why I really, really like how that character is written in the game. So, Ian, what's your first character?
I mean, he's come up so many times, so
Yep,
it's
he's a
it
really
might
great
as well. Yeah,
character.
Nathan
So,
Drake,
hmm of
um,
the Uncharted
of
series.
the Uncharted series. Yeah, action survivor. To some degree, I would say a hardened hero.
Hmm
Eventually,
Yeah,
yeah, he started by the fourth game. You know, he's fairly unaffected by major things
yeah,
like going over a waterfall in a jeep.
yeah,
Because why not?
yep. Or
Um,
chasing a train and jumping onto it.
or falling off of a yeah,
Hmm
so many things.
So many
But
things.
yeah, no, I feel like if we talked about Nathan Drake just in the first game, he's still an interesting character
Hmm
because he has a lot of facets to him. I mean, yes, to me in the first game, he very much felt like a combination of Crash Bandicoot and Jack from Jack and Daxter,
Right.
which were the studio's other two games that they'd released at that point.
hmm
To me, he was kind of like a combination of those two things, where
And maybe through the gameplay, I would agree.
he is a little goofy, but he does have a little bit of a serious side to him.
Right.
But as he grows throughout the games,
hmm
they do really develop him, and you do really feel for this character.
Yeah.
He,
Especially like over the course of the four games, you go from like him as a child in the back flashes in the fourth game of him
yep,
being an orphan, all the way up to like the final climax of like the game and like his relationship with Elena.
yeah, you see, like you get to go through this character's full arc.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're not really left wondering what he does.
Yeah, and like playing through the game, I was completely invested in these, like both Nathan and Elena, because like I really wanted to know whether or not they died, they moved on and separated, they got together, they just kept on going their merry way and just like never um, changed. Like, what did they do?
And that was, I think the fourth kind of hit the hardest.
Because that was really the main point of the
Well,
game.
it's seeing, yes, they get together. If you played it, you saw it like 5 minutes in, you know that they're married. Um,
Right, but the
but
fourth
that's
game, like they go through turmoil in their relationship, and
well,
Elena's
exactly,
like,
like
"You're lying to me. You're still doing this. Like, I want to separate
because
from
he said he
you."
was gonna hang it up. He said he
Yeah,
would hang it up
and he
for her.
completely lied about
He
it.
did, but you can see the conflict in him.
Yeah, because it's believable. Like the characters are so well written that it's like, no, that makes sense. That like you can go, come on, Nathan, like stop screwing this up. But like if you really think about it, it's Nathan,
Yeah, you
right?
know he couldn't not do it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Especially since his brother gets involved in the fourth
I
game,
mean,
and that's what drags him in, right? And
I
then all of his other friends sort of like,
I'll throw a little bit of shade on the brother because it's 3 games and not mentioned. Oh, by the way, I have a brother.
that's true.
That's 3 games plus a PSP game, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Or no, a Vita game. A Vita
He's
game,
in the game where you play as Chloe,
which is
the
the
side quest.
yeah
Yeah.
the after game that released after 4
Yeah.
because they wanted to get a little bit more mileage out of that character. I mean that I did find a little bit lazy, but the character of Nathan himself,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I enjoy seeing his struggles.
Yep.
Um, that sounded really mean. It's not that I enjoy seeing him struggle. I enjoy seeing how he comes to terms with the decisions that he makes.
Yeah.
They're very believable,
Mm-hmm.
and everything stays true to the character.
Yeah.
They don't really deviate. You don't suddenly see him make a decision that he wouldn't make.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, this isn't a varied ending game. Like you have a set path that you're following.
Yeah.
But it's a good ride.
Mm-hmm.
But you had another one, JC? I
Uh,
believe it was another BioWare game.
Yeah, it's another Bioware game. Go figure, right? So the next character is Liara from the Mass Effect series. And I chose this character just because I felt that this character had the most variance and change over the Mass Effect series itself. Because she initially starts out as a scientist who's interested in the plight against the Reapers and everything, to the second game being the Shadow Broker and her completely having an alignment shift and a complete moral shift. At her core roots, she's still there. And what's the most interesting about this game is that, or at least what I found interesting through my playthrough, if you romance Liara, and you kind of have different levels of the romance where you're kind of just like in a starting of a relationship, and then you can eventually like commit to a person, and then the other characters kind of either get mad and try and get you to select them, or they back off eventually, and then you're like hard committed and it's like, okay, well, your shepherd is now with this character. And if you did that in the first game, and then in the second game, while she's not even in the game except for story plot, basically, because she's not a playable character, she's just in the background essentially, which is part of her character trope in that game, where she's essentially just a shadow figure, basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if you start romancing somebody else in the second game, because Mass Effect, and
you're probably gonna do it.
You're probably gonna do it.
It's probably gonna be Garrus.
It's probably gonna be Garrus. And so the thing is that, which is funny because I played through as FemShep, and in the first game I was like full like path with Liara, and then in the second game I was like, this Garrus guy is really freaking cool, and then in the third game she was like, you're hanging out with Garrus a lot. And I was like, yeah, what of it?
Let's not talk about it.
Yeah, but I hadn't fully committed to it because I was like, I know there's like gonna be another one, and I don't know.
But that's the thing. Like, I find that really interesting because you didn't necessarily know
that,
you didn't. Yes, for sure, there is going to be a third game.
And it comes up. And that's the greatest thing about this whole entire story arc, is because it's like, yeah, I left, but like you should still be there. And it kind of comes back from, originally in the first game she was kind of the hero worshiper trope, where she initially essentially really idolizes Shepard for what he's doing and helping the galaxy, and wants to help out as much as possible, and the friendship and or relationship kind of grows from there. And from that, like I said, in the second game is complete like almost like, I would say, neutral good to neutral evil.
Yeah.
And then that entire paradigm shift basically distances you from her, because like she's not in the second game. And then she kind of comes back, and she's still a Shadow Broker, and she's still changed. You haven't seen her in 100 hours of gameplay, and it's like, what the heck, man? Like, holy crap.
Should have stayed faithful.
Well, I did, but a lot of people I know who played through this actually had that issue, and it was really interesting. Yeah, and if I weren't to put Liara on the list, I would have put Garrus on the list because he's really cool. But anyway,
I mean, my wife plays through these games a lot, and all I ever hear about is Garrus.
It's because Garrus is awesome. The only thing is like, you'd think after 3 games he'd learn how to calibrate the ship or finish them or something, but I don't know. That's my only complaint about him. But yeah, that's pretty much the main points I wanted to talk about Liara. I just found it really interesting how that paradigm shift happens, and then those repercussions can happen depending on how you interacted with her, and they're more interesting if you actually pursued a relationship within the first and second game, and how that can basically come to be. And one of the reasons why I find it most interesting is because she acts like, regardless of her paradigm shift, more true to the relationship through her actions and dialogue, I feel, than the other characters. Though everybody eventually is like, you know, there's no real cheating other than what Shepard does. But,
well, yeah.
Yeah. So, Liara and Mass Effect series. Your next one, Ian?
I went a little bit different with this one because it, when we started talking about the idea, this was actually one of the things that jumped into my brain right away.
Right.
Because I found this was really interesting, specifically from the... I want to say the series,
right?
The overall series that it's from.
Yeah, and I'm glad you put this on the list because I really wanted to talk about this type of character throughout our episode, because it's I find one of the most interesting types of characters in the respect that it's kind of hard to do, and it doesn't happen that often.
It's true. Now, it's Sam Fisher from Splinter Cell, which is a Tom Clancy game. I mean, it's got the branding on it.
Right.
Yeah, even though I don't think there's a Tom Clancy anymore. Rest in peace. But yeah, no, for the most part, when you play a Tom Clancy game, I mean, I can't think of a named character in like a Rainbow Six or Hawks or End War. I mean, I Tom Clancy characters from some of the movies like Jack Ryan,
Right.
Who is an interesting character, but the neat thing about Sam Fisher is because he's something that develops over the course of, I want to say, 6 games.
Right.
And I know I might get a little bit of I guess hate for this one, but what's interesting, especially in Double Agent and Conviction, is it really goes into a much more personal story for Sam, and you see him as slightly more human, in that he has like his own internal conflicts. I know you get that throughout the other games,
right?
With some of the decision making that he has to do, but the missions become a lot more personal to him. It's a lot less go save the world.
Right.
It's more of
save the city.
In Double Agent, you have him leaving Third Echelon because of not liking the way things are going,
right,
and struggling with that, and then. In Conviction, you've got this whole hunt for your daughter, who you believed was dead from the previous game.
Oh, okay.
Which, again, I know a lot of people didn't love the writing in those, but I personally do find it interesting to take a character who is basically just a hardened hero.
Right.
Like, he's a veteran. He starts at 45. Like, Splinter Cell 1, Sam Fisher's 45.
Right.
I think by the last game, he's like 50-something.
Wow.
I want to say 57. In Blacklist.
So he's kind of like...
Time-wise, he's old.
Yeah.
But he's still, an absolute badass. He has, 40... Well, I guess, probably, 35 years of military training.
Right.
Just, ground into him. So everything you do, you're like, yeah, okay, I get it. It makes sense. He's been doing this for a long time. It's right. Almost like the Punisher. You have someone, especially in the later Punisher arcs where you're reading and he's you actually see him as an old man. You're like, okay, this is sort of believable that this guy was in Nam, but he's still a badass because he's still been doing this since then.
Right.
But I like the humanization. I like that they make things personal for him. Yeah, not everything makes sense, but seeing you try to track down your daughter, it's just much more of an interesting story.
Right.
Than just I need to find, villain X because he's going to blow up the world.
Right. It's not just the simple, damsel in distress, point where it's just that's a plot point, I gotta go do it.
Yeah, it's personal to the character and you can see it, and he does get emotional,
right.
You can get carried away in the interrogations, which are a lot of fun, and it's just interesting. I'm not really I've gone on about it too long. He's not a super deep character.
No, but it's still interesting because it is still in all different realms of character development. You have different variants of it, and some of them in certain aspects of different types of games are better than others, right? This character is probably holistically very similar to...
Solid Snake.
Solid Snake, yeah.
Again, you have great character progression with Snake. But it's in that genre of I guess stealth action or even just action period.
Right.
You don't get a ton of character development. And it's neat to see something. Now, I guess in a lot of cases you don't get the time because a lot of, I guess, heroes will get one game.
Right. In the Tom Clancy games, you're saying.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, or Tom Clancy specifically. I can't name a single operator in Rainbow Six Siege. And I'm sure each of them has a backstory because somebody was paid to write it, but you didn't see it and you didn't play through any of it. The only thing you really get is projecting your own feelings on those characters.
Right, yeah, it's not necessarily as memorable unless you can relate to that specific instance.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And again, even the earlier Rainbow Six games, you're just point A to point B.
Right.
Looking for evil terrorist group leader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did find that Splinter Cell was the breakaway, and I mean it took 4 games to get there, but yeah, seeing his arc, like more personal arc, is pretty interesting. But I think we got one more that we're probably both going to talk about because we both have feelings about this.
Yeah.
Slightly different ones.
So, Chloe Price from Life is Strange and Before the Storm is our last character.
Yep.
And she kind of changes between the two games a little bit, but she's still at core the same person. And you haven't necessarily played Before the Storm yet, have you?
I have not.
Okay, but in Before the Storm, she's a little bit more of the anti-hero, whereas in Life is Strange, she's a little bit more portrayed as the rebel without a cause at the beginning. And she's also the best friend or loving character in both games, whether it be to Rachel or it be to Max. And the other big character trope that she covers is that she blames herself for many of the things that happen around her and to her, whether it be her father's death or in Before the Storm, whenever she's trying to help Rachel. And the last thing that she kind of really does in both of the games is kind of blame herself many times over and tries to help with many of the situations that happen to her and around her. And in Before the Storm, an example of this is Rachel and her circumstances in that game, which I won't get too into in case you play through that. Basically what is happening to Rachel throughout that game kind of becomes Chloe's problems as the story progresses because she's kind of making it her problem so that she can kind of sort of help her friend out in that regard. And the same is true with Max in Life is Strange because the issues that Max is having with the different conundrums of the time travel and trying to save Chloe or other people
I mean,
and circumstances.
I kind of feel like it's a little like inverse
Mm-hmm.
in Life is Strange because it's typically Max who is taking on the problems that are happening to Chloe.
Yeah, and
trying to like.
I completely agree. I would say both of them have the same character trope on them, but the reason why I'm saying Chloe in Life is Strange does this is because she basically ends up blaming herself for Max ending up in the dark room. And she is really remorseful and wants to fix that. And also, whenever she chooses Bay versus Bay, depending on what you do in the game and you choose Bay or Bay, all the lines and dialogue are written in such a way leading up to that point that her lines at the end can mean different things depending on who's reading them and what the events happened before that is.
Yeah.
And she's really basically almost kind of like to the point where she's essentially saying like this is my fault, you don't have to choose me, and stuff like that. And then like Max's reaction is essentially like, no, like it isn't necessarily your fault, I'm gonna make like my choice. It's not like necessarily based on like, it's based on everything but it's not based on everything kind of thing, if that makes sense. And like I said, depending on how you're playing through the game, that can mean two different things. It can either mean like, no, I'm gonna save Bay, or no, I'm gonna save Bay. So yeah, anything to add to that, Ian?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chloe's an interesting character. She was very. I think she was well written. But I feel like the issue I have with Chloe is that she reminds me a lot of people that I knew when I was younger.
Right.
She is very human.
Mm-hmm.
But she's also got a lot of baggage. And it's not all necessarily her fault or her problem,
Mm-hmm.
but I find as time has gone on and I've gone farther away from the game itself, I love the game. The game's amazing. If you haven't played it, play it. I'm sure if you've made it this far, you've at least been kind of curious about playing it, because we spent an entire episode talking about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there was a brief Silent Hill moment, but pretty much like an hour devoted to just this game.
Yep.
So it's not that we don't like it. I just the farther away I get from it, the more I'm just like, man, get your stuff together, Chloe.
And what's really interesting about this, and this is why I love Before the Storm just as much, is because you know, I kind of had the same feeling. And playing through Before the Storm, it goes over Chloe's backstory and the lead up to what happened to Rachel. And it adds up that extra layer of depth to kind of like give you either some extra information or character understanding or further character development and stuff like that, which was really, really cool. So yeah.
And that's kind of the beauty of where we are at this point.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't necessarily get that second game always.
Yeah.
But now that people do, they really do take that opportunity to actually deliver more on the story.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
because there are some games where there's like the prequel game, so to speak, where it kind of goes over their backstory. Kind of like Blood Omen 2 is a good example of this too, because you're playing as Cain again, and you play in the past, and it's after the events of Blood Omen 1, but before the events of Soul Reaver, which basically fills an entire gap of from what, if I recall correctly, what really developed Cain into what Cain was in Soul Reaver 1 and 2. And that's really interesting to understand. You know, from the hints and back dialogue and stuff like that that happen through Soul Reaver 1 and 2, and a little bit from Blood Omen if you played it, but it fills in that really important gap of time.
It does, and
it's neat how sometimes that happens with games.
It actually makes a decision for you too, because there is a big decision at the end of I guess like 25-year-old game, which you didn't see a whole lot of at the time, but you have a huge decision to make right at the end of that, and then they make another game within that universe, way in the future, based on a decision. Like, they've made a hard decision as to what the actual like canon is in that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in Soul Reaver 2, it talks a lot about the past and what happened with the pillars and everything like that, and the Elder God, and like what happened with the Elder God and everything. And it's just a beautifully written story.
It's true.
She writes amazing stories.
I mean,
everything from Nathan Drake to
Cain. I know, that's true.
Like,
we've given so much love.
Yeah.
But no, it's in the 80s and early 90s, you didn't really see this.
Not in this much detail, and it continues to develop and grow further and more and more refined. It's great, because even your generic games that didn't necessarily have a story in the 80s and 90s now are having at least some little bit of story, which is kind of cool, because it gives you, sometimes it's not wanted, and sometimes it's not there, and it's not needed, but it's nice whenever it is.
Yeah, exactly. You give me 2 pages of like, this is what's happening. Mm-hmm. This is your purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
It gets me rolling.
Yeah.
But sometimes you want to sit down and really kind of sink your teeth into a character.
Yeah.
And really get to know it.
And again, there's hundreds of characters out there, and we could have gone over many of them. There's very obvious ones that we could have talked about, like the characters from The Last of Us. We could have even had fun and done like Mario or like Princess Peach and stuff like that.
Oh, we'll do that at some point.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that at some point. Or any of the other BioWare games, like especially the Baldur's Gate game or something like that.
Or Jade Empire.
And yeah, it's it's really cool.
It's a testament to where we are and where we're going as a genre.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very excited to see the things that continue to release.
Yeah, and it is, me too, especially since it's one of my favorite aspects of games, as viewers probably know. It's the story and the characters for me a lot of the time. And yeah, Anyway, that's probably a good place to end the episode. So
let us know what your favorite character is down in the comments below and why.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to read through some of the comments, if there are any. To maybe there's a character that we forgot or we can reminisce about. Yeah, so be sure to tune in for our next episode, which happens every Wednesday. And for people who've lasted this long in the episode, thank you. We're going to be doing a little bit extra content starting this month.
You may have seen some of it already.
You might have. And yeah, so stay tuned for more content. See you next week.
Ciao.